Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 3 of week 5 and the topic of today's lecture is Gramsci's on role of ideas. So, we have been already discussing the Gramsci's views on role of ideas in our earlier lecture, and today we will continue with some more ideas of Gramsci on the role of ideology in the society. So, basically the concepts which will be covered in today's lecture are: what is the notion of organic intellectuals and the philosophy of praxis? What do we mean by the notion of organic intellectuals and how they help in maintaining the capitalist hegemony and also in terms of the challenging the hegemony? What we understand by the relationship between hegemony and the dynamics of power? What is war of position and attainment of hegemony? And then at the last we will talk about self-nationalization and popular will. So, let us first understand in some more detail, because we have already talked about the concept of organic ideology in our last lecture. Here we are going to understand what we mean by organic intellectual. Now, Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci introduced the concept of organic intellectual in his prison notebooks. He highlighted their significance in understanding his philosophy of praxis. Now, we must understand what we mean by the philosophy of praxis. Now, Gramsci's philosophy of praxis focuses on the importance of culture, ideas and people's choices in bringing about historical change. So, instead of considering economic factors as the only determinant of history, Gramsci believed that individuals are active participants in shaping their own destiny rather than just passive victims of their circumstances. So, therefore, again the same debate is coming, that is the debate between the determinism and the role of agency in shaping individual's life. And we have found this debate between all the Marxist writers, because if you read Karl Marx theory, then it is based on a principle of determinism, whereas Gramsci, who is a post-Marxist thinker, have argued that simply the individual is not a passive force who is acting as per the whims and wishes of the economic conditions of the society. Individual is also having the agency to determine to act on his own free will. So, they are not the only determinant, but they are also active participants in shaping their destiny. So, with this brief understanding, we must further know that the philosophy of praxis helped us to understand dominant class exercise of hegemony over the subordinate class, and how the latter can develop a counter hegemony that challenges the existing order. So, this interplay of praxis, it provides a fertile ground for not only the exercise of hegemony by the bourgeois over the people, but also it provides opportunities for the people to develop a counter narrative against the bourgeois. According to Gramsci, intellectuals are not someone who possess a special quality of mind. So, we must understand that what he meant by intellectual, because generally we associate the word intellectual with a person of very high intellect, with lots of knowledge, merit and understanding. How Gramsci has defined intellectual? Gramsci has said that he is not somebody who possesses a special quality of mind or a superior level of education, but rather intellectuals are defined by their functions and role in society. So, what type of functions, what roles they are playing in the society, that determines whether a person is an intellectual or not. Gramsci has divided intellectuals into two types. First is the traditional intellectual and second is the organic intellectual. So, we must understand that the intellectuals have a certain role to play in the society, and definitely these two types of intellectual have been assigned separate roles. Now, who are the traditional intellectuals? Traditional intellectuals are those who claim to be independent and autonomous from any class or social group. So, they claim to be independent, but whether they are independent or not, that needs to be verified. And they claim that they are autonomous from any social group, from any political or class group. But in reality, what is taking place is that they are dependent. And before we understand their actual alignment, it is necessary to know that they are bearers of universal values and knowledge, such as priests, teachers, artists, scientists, etc. Because they constitute the traditional group. They are the forebearers of knowledge, and they have got education in a certain discipline, in a certain field of expertise they have attained. So, therefore, they are considered as a bearer of universal values and knowledge. But Gramsci, again coming back to our earlier point, argued that traditional intellectuals are independent, but they are actually aligned with some or other dominant class and serve its interest by legitimizing its worldviews and values. So, though they appear to be independent, though they are appearing to be performing some other role, at the back it may be aligning with a particular dominant class and helping in propagating the ideology, values and ideals of that class. Organic intellectuals, on the contrast, are those who emerge from within a specific class or social group and articulates its interest and aspirations. So, who are organic individual? As the name suggests, they are organically related to a particular group. So, they arise from a group, they arise from a specific class, and since they arise from a specific class, so naturally they carry with them the interest, aspirations and demands of that class. Organic individuals or intellectuals can play a very important role in challenging capitalist hegemony and building a counter hegemonic bloc. We have to understand that this organic intellectuals have a very important role, and Gramsci argues that they not only help in making legitimate the values and ideals of the ruling class, but they also can help in developing a counter narrative so that it can provide a challenge to the capitalist hegemony. So, therefore, role of organic intellectuals are very important. Now, let us understand in some detail what is their role in challenging the capitalist hegemony. Capitalist hegemony is not only based on coercion and violence, it is also based on consent and persuasion. Now, this is a very serious problem associated with the capitalist economy, and I think that poses a very important challenge to the Marxist theory, because Marx has analyzed the downfall of the capitalist system in terms of economic relations, in terms of economic factors, and he predicted that because of the gross class inequalities and the class conflict, there will arise a severe class struggle which will ultimately lead to revolution, throwing of the class, throwing up of the bourgeois class by the proletariat, and ultimately foundation of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and the last stage is establishment of communism. But he could not foresee that hegemony can also be maintained by culture, consent and persuasion. Now, if I am ready to obey a person based on my own will, then how can I think of acting against that? How can I think of challenging when I am not aware that he or she is exercising a form of domination over me? So, this is a serious issue or a development which has helped in or which has promoted and inspired the post-Marxist thinkers to reinterpret Marxism from a new perspective. Now, how this consent is manufactured? The consent is manufactured by the dominant class through various institutions and practices such as education, media, religion, culture, etc., to spread its ideology and value among the subordinate class and to incorporate them to its worldview. Now, you can see that there are so many apparatus, so many institutions, so many measures. And now, in the age of mass media, you can very well understand that how mass media has been given so much of importance by all the political parties, political leaders to propagate their ideas, to propagate their values, to help them in campaigning during the election and also during the normal days. So, media has emerged as a very important channel or means by which consent is manufactured. Then we have education, a particular type of education, whether education of history or sociology, education of our past, can help in indoctrinating the small children to a particular ideology, to a particular set of thinking, thereby accessing or manufacturing their consent much more easy and smooth in nature. So, therefore, besides education and media, we may have the weapon of religion. How religion has been used in the recent times very actively in politics, and we find the resurgence of religion in politics across the world. However, hegemony is never complete or stable. It is always contested and resisted by alternative forms of consciousness and culture that expresses the needs and demands of the oppressed classes and groups. So, hegemony is not permanent, that once it is established, now that is forever, because that is a continuous contested space. One particular form of ideas may be contested by multifarious other ideas in the days to come. So, naturally, there is always a conflictual situation, and there are chances that the other type of consciousness or ideas can replace the prevalent one and acquire its position. So, alternative forms of consciousness and culture expresses the needs and demands of the oppressed classes and groups, and these consciousness they play a very important role in challenging the hegemony. Now, organic intellectuals, because we are studying the role of organic intellectuals. Organic intellectuals play a crucial role to articulate these alternative forms of consciousness and culture into a coherent and comprehensive worldview that challenge the dominant one. Very, very important, because it is not possible for the ordinary citizens, ordinary individuals to channelize the viewpoints or the alternative narrative of the suppressed and the marginalized into the mainstream discourse. Now, that is being done by the organic intellectuals who try to integrate these alternative voices into the mainstream discourse so that it can develop into a national or a bigger way of challenging the dominant discourse. These intellectuals also play a crucial role in articulating the interest and aspirations of the hegemonic class. They play a very important role in articulating the interest and aspiration of the hegemonic class while incorporating elements from the subordinate class. So, you can see the relationship is very complicated, it is a complex, it is not as simple. So, it incorporates some of the elements of the dominant class and some of the ideas of the subordinate class. So, therefore, it acts as a bridge between the two groups. Now, what is the relationship between hegemony and power dynamics? Now, let us try to understand. Now, hegemony as conceptualized by Gramsci involves a delicate balance between coercion and consent, with the latter predominating. So, there are two ways in which hegemony is exercised. One is hegemony by coercion, which is obtained by the repressive mechanism of the state or the machinery of the state by the use of force. And the second, more subtle and more acceptable by the people as well as the rulers, is obtaining or establishing the hegemony by consent. So, therefore, two ways in which hegemony can be acquired. Unlike crude forms of domination based solely on force, hegemony relies on the active consent and participation of the subordinate groups. So, crude form of domination can be exercised by physical exercise of force, by the use of army, by the use of armaments or the threat of use of force. There can be multifarious ways in which the crude form of domination can be exercised. But why hegemony through consent is preferable? Yeah, because it is based on the active consent and participation of the subordinate groups. So, therefore, the exercise of power becomes very easy. It becomes much more smoother and non-conflictual in nature also. So, power relations according to Gramsci are characterized by a dialectical interplay between coercion and consent. So, there is a continuous interplay, a dialectical interplay going on between the forces of coercion and the forces of consent, and that determines the power relations in the society. While coercion remains a tool of the ruling class, hegemonic power operates primarily through the exercise of ideological influence and cultural leadership. So, therefore, we are studying the role of ideas, and here you can see that how ideas are so important for Gramsci to understand how the cultural hegemony is maintained, because we have seen that all the rulers in the Western capitalist society, they do not want to rule by force, they do not want to rule by coercion, they want to rule by consent, and therefore, the role of ideology becomes very important, how the ideology can be used to manufacture consent. And therefore, we can understand that how in maintaining the cultural hegemony, the role of ideas is important, and also cultural leadership, because ideas are essential to maintain cultural leadership too. Now, Gramsci emphasizes the importance of winning consent in civil society as a precursor to political domination. Now, this is another very important point. So, every capitalist society we find the rulers, they want that before they resort to political domination, they want that there should be consent of the civil society in their rule. So, now there are two stages or two steps to acquire power. One is to get the power through the consent of the civil society, and once you are in power, then you can use domination if it is required, and most of the time it is better to be based on consent. Now, during the periods of crisis or instability, the struggle for hegemony intensifies as competing social forces seek to shape ideological terrain and garner popular support. So, it is basically the clash between ideas. So, when there is some instability, when there is some crisis, you will find that a particular group having a certain ideology, is being questioned or challenged by another group with an alternative ideology or with a totally opposing ideology, and there can be clash. You have seen that in the society such clashes take place occasionally, the clash of ideas. And this clash of ideas is nothing but the clash to acquire power and dominance. It is a struggle for hegemony and to establish one set of ideas as supreme or sovereign over others. And also there is the struggle for garnering the support of the maximum number of people through the use of a particular ideology. So, we can see that in the society different forms of ideologies are competing with each other for garnering the or for getting the support of the people. Now, what is war of position and attainment of hegemony? Gramsci introduces the concept of war of position, which refers to a protracted ideological struggle waged primarily on the cultural front. Because we know that there are so many means of warfare in the present world, and with the advancement of science and technology, the advancement in the field of armament has taken place to a massive length. But in spite of making so much of progress in the means of warfare, still warfare at the cultural level is considered more powerful than warfare being conducted at the level of armaments or at the physical level. The reason being that through the means of culture or through the means of ideological warfare, you are able to gain long lasting legitimacy to your rule in comparison to the rule which is obtained by force and coercion. So, war of position refers to a protracted ideological struggle waged primarily on the cultural front. So, at the level of culture, when there are multiple ideas which are clashing with each other, so war of position denotes that at which point or at which position you can be better able to handle these conflicts. Unlike conventional forms of warfare, the war of position involves a battle for heart and minds rather than territory. So, very important distinction. So called ideological warfare or cultural warfare is not warfare at the level of the battleground, but it takes place at the level of heart and mind. So, if you can capture the mind or you can indoctrinate a person's mind with certain ideas, then your control over that individual will be forever. Economic struggle evolves into political battles aimed at achieving hegemony over civil society. So, even the economic battles, besides the political battles, they also want to capture the consent of the civil society, because that is important for establishing certain economic institutions, certain economic practices in the society. So, therefore, you can see that how the role of ideas have been emphasized upon by Gramsci and how it has helped in maintaining and how it has helped in practicing hegemony or dominance by the ruling class over the working class. Now, through a combination of cultural, educational and organizational initiatives, competing social forces seeks to establish their ideological dominance and mobilize support. So, it is not simply cultural, but also educational, organizational initiatives. Different social forces they combine and they establish their ideological dominance and try to mobilize popular support. Now, hegemony can be attained through either transformism, involving the absorption of elements from allied and antagonistic groups, or expansive hegemony, which relies on direct consensus and active participation from the subordinate groups. So, see, you He is making a distinction between two ways in which hegemony can be acquired. One is through the process of transformism, which means involving certain elements from the allied and antagonistic groups and establishing one's hegemony. It is a process of assimilation of the antagonistic groups into your own fold, and thereby you transform the ideological balance in your favor. And the next is expansive hegemony, where you seek direct consensus or direct acceptance and active participation from the subordinate group. So, that helps in the expansion of the sphere of hegemony. The process of attaining hegemony requires the articulation of a collective national popular will. So, when we are talking about how to attain hegemony or how hegemony is attained, we have to understand that it has to be done at the national level, and both the national and the popular will has to be combined, incorporating the aspirations of the subordinate classes into the hegemonic project. Because you can establish hegemony over the larger sections of the society only when you incorporate into its fold all the elements of the society, whether they belong to the marginalized class, whether they belong to tribals, or for that matter any segment of the society. You have to incorporate all of them so that you can expand the sphere of hegemonic influence. And then another important concept is self-nationalization and popular will. Expansive hegemony necessitates the self-nationalization of the proletariat, wherein working class articulates its interest as integral to the broader national struggle. So, self-nationalization of proletariat is also very important, which is connected with the notion of expansive hegemony, that working class have to articulate their interest to the broader nationalistic aims and aspirations. By aligning its goals with the aspiration of the broader populace, the proletariat seeks to build a broad-based coalition capable of challenging existing power structure. So, whether it is the mainstream hegemony or the counter hegemony which is supposed to be built by the proletariat, it has to be expansive in nature. It has to incorporate as many groups as possible, as many viewpoints and as many interests as possible, so that it can build a broad based coalition, and then only it will be able to challenge the existing power structure. Gramsci emphasizes the importance of collective national popular will as the basis for hegemonic rule. So, how the hegemonic rule will be established, that is being emphasized upon by Gramsci in the form of collective national popular will. This involves the articulation of national popular aspirations by the hegemonic class, garnering broad based support for its agenda. The successful articulation of collective will allow the hegemonic class to consolidate its power and establish its domination over the society. So, you can see the connection between hegemony, collective will and exercise of dominance. By building alliances and mobilizing popular support, the ruling class seeks to maintain its hegemonic position and uphold its existing social order. So, it is ultimately you see how the power is exercised and dominance is exercised by the ruling class over the remaining sections of the society by mobilizing the support and by mobilizing the consent based on certain ideas and ideology. So, here in this lecture we understood the role of ideas in the capitalist society, or for that matter in the maintenance of any society, and also its role in bringing about transformation and change in that society. By giving the notion of hegemony and counter hegemony, Gramsci has tried to explain that how, if we want to bring about change and transformation in the society, we have to address it at the level of ideas. We have to use the counter ideology or the counter narrative to confront the ideological positions of the ruling elite. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture, followed by certain questions like what is organic intellectuals and explain their function in the society. Now, discuss Gramsci's notion of the war of position and its relevance in contemporary social and political context. How does it differ from conventional forms of conflict? How does Gramsci's concept of expansive hegemony offers insights into the strategies employed by ruling class to maintain power and influence over the society? So, with this, I come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much.